Good evening, and thank you for attending the Charter Review public hearing for the City of Aurora for April 11th, 2023. The public hearing is now called to order. We do have interpretation services available for Spanish for anyone that needs them, so just let us know if you do. We have some folks here in the audience to speak, as well as folks online. When we're taking comments and questions, we will begin with folks in person, and then we will move to the folks that are attending online. If you have not signed up to speak, then if you're in person, you can still raise your hand to come up and ask questions or address the speakers. And if you're online, you can raise your virtual hand in order to be acknowledged for questions or comments. And then if you do speak, though you're not currently signed up, we will ask that you complete a speaker slip just so that we have that for the public record. So tonight we will be reviewing all of the items that have been brought forward by the Council Ad Hoc Charter Review Committee, and we'll have those for comments and questions. Before that, however, we are going to have background presentations on a strong mayor form of government and process of adoption, and then examples of the strong mayor form of government in U.S. cities from our city staff. For those, the reason that we decided to bring them is that we have heard that there is a proposal out there to switch the City of Aurora from a council manager form of government to a strong mayor form of government. That has not come before the Council Ad Hoc Charter Review Committee, but we still did want members of the public to have information about that and have the opportunity to comment. So with me here tonight are the other members of the Council Ad Hoc Charter Review Committee, Councilmember Marcano from Ward 4 and Councilmember Lawson at large. And without further ado, we will begin with our presentations. Our first presentation will be a background on strong mayor form and process of adoption by Jeff Wilson.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. It's my pleasure to be here this evening. Since it was arranged for me to be here, I've received some more coaching on the division of labor between myself and Ms. Rogers, who you'll be hearing from next. She's going to focus more on the substance, and I'm going to be primarily focused on process for this very substantial undertaking that you've asked me to explain in terms of process. Fortunately for Aurora, you have a very detailed initiated charter amendment provision in your code, beginning at section 54.141 of the code. Although this section of the code is denominated an initiative provision, buried in it is a provision that doesn't have to do with initiative. It's the power of the charter to refer any measure, as many measures as you wish, to the people directly. So insofar as I'm addressing the manner of executing this change, one way to do it would be for staff to draft a charter amendment on your behalf, and then you would refer it to the people, much like the process I'm going to describe here in a moment. So, as I understand it, there may be an initiated proposal in this regard here in Aurora. The first point I want to make about your process is that the starting gun, what starts the running of the clock, is entirely in the power of the proponents. They begin this whole thing. I always have in my mind's eye the turning over of the glass to run the sand. It starts when they file a notice of intent with the city. Once the proponents file a notice of intent with the city, to circulate a charter amendment initiative, the clock starts running. And within 10 days after doing that, the proponent has to submit the form of the amendment to the charter in ordinance form. Now, one of the things that really impressed me thinking about a strong mayor form of government is how front-loaded this project is in terms of substantive work as an attorney. This is a drafting mother. I mean, it's a big project. It's not like a charter amendment to change the number of days to fill a vacancy. This is huge. This is changing your style of government. So presumably a lot of work is done before the notice of intent is given, is what I'm saying, because you got to have everything organized by then. The text is then turned in the form of the ordinance along with the petition sections to the clerk for approval as to form. The clerk works with the proponents to approve the petition sections as to form, and once that's done, another clock starts running, the circulation clock. The proponents have 120 days to get the signatures on their petitions. Now, they have a choice at that point. They can either get a larger number of signatures and petition for a special election date, or they can get a lesser number of signatures and have the question appear if they're successful on a regular municipal election ballot. After the 120 days, the 6 months is out there, the petition comes back in, the clerk has what does the clerk have? 30 days within which to conduct his or her initial review of the petitions after they come in. Once that is done, two things can occur. One, you can have a protest to the initial determination of sufficiency or insufficiency by the clerk, and that can go off into district court, and you can spend all sorts of time, but that process runs its course. And then the other thing that has to happen is within 10 days after the initial determination, a title is set. The clerk sets a title and a submission clause on the measure, and that too can be the subject of protests, and your ordinances provide expedited procedures for protesting the title and protesting the signature determination, and so on and so forth. Once all of this is done, once either the period within which a protest must be filed passes without a protest, or if a protest is filed and is completed, we reach the final determination of petition sufficiency. And when that happens, the the matter is submitted to council, and you have 30 days after that to submit the matter to the voters for a vote. And as I said earlier, it's either a special election date or the regular election date. That's the process. Now, in your ordinance, there are also sort of back end of the election processes for tabulating ballots and so on and so forth. Again, the important work in this entire process, in my opinion, happens before even the notice of intent occurs. It's such a complex measure, and I guess one of the comments I'll make, and that I've seen in other cities, is that often we're in a hurry to do these things, even regular charter amendments, because our election process is fairly complicated these days, and we're often doing coordinated elections in conjunction with other jurisdictions. We're not totally in charge of everything, but that, I don't think my comment, I don't think that relieves us of the obligation, and especially on something like strong mayor, to get it right. I mean, this is really important stuff. In terms of just a political, down at the CAP, I worked a bunch of years down at the state legislature.
Mr. Wilson, I'm sorry, can you check and make sure your mic is on? I'm realizing we can hear you, but the folks on TV
Test.
may not be able to. Okay.
Yeah, it's on.
All right, thank you.
Down at the Capitol, we used to not want to fix bad bills because it made them harder to kill, you know. But I think this is something different. You know, one of these things. My personal opinion is there's sort of a public trust obligation to get the proposal right. If the people enact the thing, whatever you think of it, at least it'll be operationally functional. The people will be provided with a government that works. I think the drafting on something like this has to be done very carefully, very deliberately. The drafting has to be very clear. One of the great things we have in this state is a fairly recent example of a city going through this, and that's Colorado Springs. And Colorado Springs had the good fortune to have their attorneys working with the proponents while the measure was pending, and that is awesome if you have a situation like that, because then everybody agrees. You can get the proposal correct and then duke it out over the policy merits of the proposal in the election. But if the people make the choice, you at least will have something that works. And I know from looking at what Colorado Springs adopted first at the ballot, it was incredibly complex, very major changes to the charter, as you can imagine, in the area of the executive branch authority, the legislative branch authority, the personnel systems, lots of stuff that needs to be worked out. And I guess I'll close with this. One of the things that we also know from Colorado Springs is that if the people approve this charter amendment, this substantial charter amendment, you're just getting started. Then it's the code. And then the attorneys will have to go through the city code and bring to you various changes in the code to implement, or to facilitate the charter changes. And I would suspect that the attorney's office might well have a suite of ordinance changes that are teed up and ready to go should the people vote yes to ease the implementation of this. So that's my presentation on process. I'd be delighted to answer any questions. Oh, and I should have said, my apologies to your clerk, because that was necessarily a 30,000-foot overview. There's a lot of detail I didn't talk about in the ordinance.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that general overview. I guess my first question is that it sounds like this is a 6-month plus process if we follow the procedure, and we're about 6 months out, give or take. Well, a little more than 6 months, but not a lot more than 6 months out from the election. So this may be a question for our city clerk more than for you. We were trying to get everything to the county clerks by about mid-May, mid-June for getting the ballots and everything certified for the election.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, would it be possible, for example, if they got the signatures more quickly, to do this process in that abbreviated time period that we currently have for getting all of our ballot questions certified to the county clerks?
I thought I might get that question. And with the caveat that I haven't sat down and worked that scenario out for this November. I think, yeah, you could. You'd have to really hustle to get the signatures. That would be that 120 days. You wouldn't use all 6 months. You don't have 6 months. You want to get it on the November ballot, you got to really move out. You don't know if there's going to be a protest. You don't know how long that's going to take to derail your effort to get on the ballot. Maybe your opposition wants to file a protest to derail, knowing the calendars tick, 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 So there's all kinds of tactical stuff that happens if you're the proponent and that you have to think about.
Okay, so the only part of that set of times or days that you laid out that could be abbreviated, though, would be that signature gathering. All of those other time periods would have to be abided by in terms of giving time for protest, giving time for all the other steps to be completed.
Well, again, with the same caveat. I've seen situations where the opponents will say, we're not going to file a protest. We're going to take it to the people. So they'll let you know that the period of course, you don't know who the protesters are necessarily, so you have to let the period run. I take that back. So,
Okay.
yeah, basically you have to let these are opportunities afforded to the public to protest the title or protest signatures, and it's come one, come all. You can't cut them short.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Are there other questions from members of the committee? Councilmember Lawson?
Yes, can I guess? Jeff, I have a question. So I just for clarification purposes, if this is a citizen initiative, where I'm kind of getting confused is when you stated that if the signatures all are verified, and I guess that's within the protest period, you said that it comes to council for approval to go to the ballot, or is that to determine if it's going to be on a regular or a special session?
Well, let me take those in reverse.
Okay.
Whether you're on a regular or special election is determined by the proponents and by the number of signatures they get. If they get the greater number, then they get a special election, and they get to designate the election, I believe, or their choice. So they work with the clerk on when that will occur. I didn't look at that aspect closely before tonight. Tell me the rest of your question again, excuse me.
I think you answered it.
Okay.
I guess what I was confused about a little bit, I understand about the citizen initiative and about the proponents, but when you stated that it would have to come to council.
That's
so
right.
Can you just explain, I'm just trying to understand why would it come to council? Is that not for approval to go onto the ballot? Because if the citizens say
Right.
that they want this to go,
Correct.
then it goes. But I'm just confused about that part that you stated.
This is a good question.
Okay.
This is different from an initiated ordinance, where in most cities we have the indirect form of initiative, where the petition is delivered to you all. You have the opportunity to adopt what is proposed, and then you don't have to have a special election. But if you decline to do that, then you refer it to the voters within a certain period of time, and they get to decide whether or not to adopt this matter. With a charter amendment, your duties are more ministerial. All you do is direct the clerk to place the matter on the ballot. There's no up or down about it at that stage.
And then, Councilmember Coons, can I ask an additional question? Just one other question about Colorado Springs. I know that they probably were a little bit more, when you're saying we have to change the ordinances and things, but it was a transition. So
yes.
are you if you're becoming a mayor form of government and you're still in a city form of government and you're having to change ordinances, you're still does the mayor form of government, that take precedence, even though we have all of these ordinances that we would have to change?
Well, I think that's another great question. And again, without taking a deep dive, I have looked at the language from Colorado Springs in that regard, the transitional language. And that was obviously worked out with great detail, provided what was going to happen when upon the adoption of ordinances to implement such and such a section, we will transition into this. These sorts of things will come into play. So as I recall, the charter, the transitional sections in the charter contemplated corresponding changes in the code to flesh out what the people were directing. And there was some time provided for this to all occur, so we weren't falling all over ourselves, or the city wasn't, excuse me.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Marcano?
All right, thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Mr. Wilson, for the presentation. So Councilmember Lawson actually asked about half of the question that I wanted to ask. So what does the time period look like for that transition?
One of those areas, you see, where you can imagine if you weren't collaborating, what you might be presented with by the voters without any of this transitional stuff figured out. So that's an area where a lot of work has to be done up front, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so if the proponents did not contemplate all of that and lay it all out within the ordinance to change the charter, then it would be uncertain how you would proceed at that point?
Well, I actually asked the folks from Colorado Springs about this. I said, with my experience down at the Capitol, especially working on election legislation, which has some similarities, being very detailed, it often took several years to get it all squared away. You'd adopt the first bill, and then you'd fix it the next year. Then you'd figure out what was screwed up because you went through an election cycle, and you'd fix it some more. Well, with a charter, That's much more difficult to do. And I asked them in the Springs, and believe it or not, they did not have 3 or 4 successive elections after the strong mayor form was adopted where they were tinkering with their charter. They got it done pretty much in one fell swoop and spent the succeeding years, modifying the code. But the charter work, and I could be wrong, this is from memory, but my impression was that most of the work on the charter was done ahead of, thank goodness, ahead of the initial consideration by the voters.
Excellent. Councilmember Marcano?
Yes, thank you. So follow-up to that, I'm curious about what the changes to code look like. Some obvious examples might be revising areas that delegate city management, certain responsibilities to the mayor's office or appointees. But what do some of the other changes that maybe we might not be thinking of look like?
Well, there were, as I said, even in the charter, there are substantial changes to the role of council and the role of the mayor. And of course, the mayor is assuming a much more, or is assuming the dominant role in management of most staff and appointment of those staff. And an entire legal infrastructure has to be provided in the code. And the code, various code sections involving the administration of various departments of the city have to be conformed to working out of the executive branch. So a million little details. I remember in the Springs, I believe they had a classified personnel system. And they, I believe, had to move that thing over underneath the mayor. And that was no easy task. That took some serious drafting and figuring. So I didn't examine it. I apologize. I didn't examine it in great depth, but I flipped through it and respected how much work evidently went into this thing. It's massive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after it was adopted, the city produced a matrix showing, implementation, necessary steps driven by various aspects of the charter. So this is something that would follow that sort of direction from your voters.
Councilor Combs?
Great. Yes, feel free to dialogue
Okay,
until
sure.
you're done.
Thank you. So I'm also curious, I guess, what kind of a budgetary impact did this have in the Springs? Because this is a whole lot of work that now needs to be done to facilitate that transition. And I guess, how did they manage that transition plus ongoing city activities? It's not like everything in the city administration just paused while this was all figured
No.
out.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I mean, it's a great question. I just don't know the answer. One of my themes in my remarks, though, was receive wisdom from Colorado Springs. They got a great staff. Their city attorney, Winetta Massey, is fantastic, really knows a lot about this, has the whole history in here, and she and her staff, I think, would be able to assist in helping the city not reinvent the wheel at taxpayer expense.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right, that's it. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I do want to see if we have any questions from members of the public. I think the way we're going to handle comment here is we'll have this presentation and the presentation from Ms. Rogers, and then we'll take general commentary. But if folks have questions about the process for transitioning to strong mayor, if you're in the audience, feel free to raise your hand and come down to the podium. If you're online, feel free to raise your virtual hand. So do we have anyone present in the chambers that would like to ask any questions? Okay, seeing none, do we have any folks online?
We do not, but just to let you know, council members, that Clerk Rodriguez is online as well, if in case you have any questions of the clerk.
Okay, so I did have the one question, Clerk Rodriguez. I don't know if you want to comment. I think we got the answer about what's required in terms of the times that need to be followed, but do you have any sense of whether there would be any conflict with the deadlines that we've already set for referring items to the ballot from the council process?
So no, there are no conflicts. I'm sorry, I'm echoing. On your side for referring the items, I did leave 1 or 2 council meetings in between the process, just in case something came up and there was an amendment. I wanted you guys to have plenty of time to make sure that passed. So you should not have any conflicts on your side. The schedule is a little bit different when council is referring the measure versus when a citizen is initiating a charter amendment.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for clarifying that. And yeah, I think that concludes our questions for Mr. Wilson. So we'll go ahead and pass it off to Ms. Rogers, and then we'll have folks give comment at the end of her presentation. All right, feel free to go ahead.
Thank you, Chair and council members. For the record, my name is Liz Rogers, Intergovernmental Relations Manager for the City of Aurora. So in this presentation, I really wanted to detail for you guys 3 examples of strong mayor forms of government. You will have a more thorough detailed report in the backup, which is a written summary, but this presentation is to serve as an overview and then answer any questions that you may have. So the 3 examples of cities we'll be talking about today is Minneapolis, Minnesota, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Honolulu, Hawaii. All of these cities have similar populations in size to Aurora and all have strong mayor form of government, whether that was adopted or has been implemented previously. So the first one we are going to talk about is Minneapolis. They did recently adopt the strong mayor form of government in November of 2021. It was approved with 52% of the vote and went into effect within 30 days. The one very interesting thing about this is since the ballot measure has been implemented, the mayor actually formed a working group within the city to kind of have guidance and implementation for how to kind of confer the city with this ballot measure. So the new structure of the government is as shown on the screen here. So the city's government structure features an executive mayor, whom the city's general executive and administrative authority resides. And then the city council is the city's legislative and primary policy-making body. So also to note, the Board of Estimate and Taxation and then Parks and Recreation Board are separately elected, and they have policy-making authority, but only narrowly defined in their areas. So this is unique to Minneapolis. So in the new structure, it features, as I mentioned, an executive mayor who is the city's general executive and administrative authority. It has 3 powers, which are considered essentially fundamental to the strong mayor system. So approve or veto legislation, formulate and manage the city's budget and finances, as well as the power to appoint and direct administrative officers and the heads of city departments. So in that, the city council is vested with the city's general legislative policy making and oversight functions, and essentially removed from the day-to-day operations of the city's administration. So in addition to that, fun fact about what they'd done is created kind of a prohibition from any action that the council would take that would usurp, invade, or interfere with the mayor's direction or supervision of the administration. City Council operates through a 7-step process that they utilize to kind of have laws and ordinance passed through. They utilize a city committee structure, and each committee is tasked with reviewing different legislations per the committee details. So acts are, if finalized, sent to the mayor, and the mayor has 5 days to veto or approve. If it is vetoed, it can go back to City Council for additional vote to override that veto. And then, so that concludes Minneapolis. The next city I want to talk to you all about is Tulsa. They have also adopted a strong mayor system by ballot in 1989. It was approved with 70% of the vote. And unfortunately, I could not dig up any archived language on the ballot measure in particular that they had used, so I do apologize for that. The city government structure overview is very similar, with the mayor acting as chief administrator and managing Tulsa's everyday operations. The duty of that position would consist of maintaining all administrative departments, executing municipal laws, submitting the budget to the city council, and appointing citizens to authorities, boards, and commissions. The city auditor in this role is actually an independent position that periodically reviews the operations, resources, and financial activities of Tulsa. So the auditor's job essentially is to ensure resources are effectively and efficiently utilized. So a little bit different from Minneapolis' structure where they have the 4 different ones. This one has kind of 3 and then the boards and commissions. So the city council in Tulsa operates as the legislative body of the city government and adopts municipal ordinances and resolutions. So one of the things that they note in Tulsa is that as a city council, it's crucial for them to listen to the concerns and suggestions of their residences. So again, how this city council operates, resolutions and ordinances must go through 2 readings before being adopted unless a waiver of this policy is implemented by the city council. An ordinance must appear on 2 separate council meetings within 90 days of being adopted. So as noted in Minneapolis, the mayor can veto ordinances and resolutions. However, the Tulsa mayor would have 15 days to do so instead of 5. So onto the last city, which is Honolulu. They have always seemed to have been a strong mayor form of government. It is worthy to note that in 1907, the governments of the city and the county did merge, so kind of similar to Denver. And then the city council serves again as the primary legislative body and the mayor as the executive. So again, in the structure, the city council is the lawmaking body of the city and county of Honolulu and determines policy and programs for the city. The council consists of 9 members elected to 4-year terms. And then each member represents the distinct districts that they're in. One thing interesting to note here is that the districts for Honolulu are reappropriated every 10 years, so they are redrawn then. The mayor, again, serves as the chief executive officer, and as that, the administration consists of the mayor, managing director, corporation council, and the city's numerous other agencies. How the council operates is that for a bill to become a law in Honolulu, it must be approved by the city council at 3 separate meetings or readings. And then after the bill passes its 3rd and final reading, the bill is presented to the mayor for a signature where it can be vetoed. However, in this case, the mayor has 10 business days to veto legislation. So that kind of concludes the overview of the cities and presentations that I wanted to share with you all today, and I will now take questions.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. My question is, you talked about the role in terms of kind of appointing, kind of managing the administration, the way our current city management would do. And the question I had at committee and that I have now is there any information about kind of the stability of staffing in that type of government versus a council manager form of government? Like, we have folks in director and above positions in the city of Aurora who've served with the city for 20, 25, and 30 years. Mm-hmm. Does that kind of thing happen in a government where the person making those appointments is elected and likely not in their position? Also, do they have term limits in
Yes.
these governments for their mayoral positions?
Yes, so I believe to answer that question specifically, in the backup document, it does detail what the term limits are for mayor and city councils for each city. I just didn't include it in this presentation today, but it is in the backup there. Okay. As far as the question on stability of staffing, I am unsure of that. I haven't seen anything in particular that references it, but that's definitely something that we can look into.
Okay, great, thank you. Other members of the committee, Councilmember Marcano?
Thank you, Councilmember Coombs, and thank you, Liz, for your presentation. So I did find it interesting that in the example cities, you listed party affiliation, actually, for these folks. And I'm curious, in your research, did you find that strong mayor cities tend to have a partisan makeup?
No, I just wanted to ensure that you had examples of different party lines and different affiliations and different areas of the country to give a diverse representation of examples.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Lawson?
Thank you, Liz, for your presentation. So I wasn't able to look up these other 2 cities. I see that Honolulu is a city and county. is Minneapolis and Tulsa. Are they city and county?
No, they are just cities.
They're just cities, okay. And then my question is, in regards to people, when you have the mayor, and I think Councilmember Coombs kind of probably already asked this question, but I want to kind of put it in a different framework. If you have appointed people from the, like in Denver, so what does that, in any of these cities, what has happened to some of the other staff possibly? Because if you have an appointed person, like it's in public safety or rec park and recs, and they're all by the mayor's appointees, I guess some of the concerns I know that some staff have brought up here is what's going to happen to my job? And I think that's a big concern. Do they, I mean, especially if they're in a more director position, or a higher position, because you have the appointed person and then you might have a director, but if that person who the mayor appoints wants somebody else, which I've seen, and I've seen it in Denver, then what happens? I mean, do these individuals have some legality, or are they just fired?
So that is a great question. I'm going to go back a little bit to Tulsa's example of their structure. So in this, and hopefully this kind of will, in a roundabout way, help give some more clarity. So the city council can confirm the citizens or can have the power to confirm appointments that the mayor makes. In terms of individuals keeping their jobs and the similar questions of staffing, I, again, do not have a good answer for you, and I would need to do additional research and look into that further.
Because I would just like to maybe see about the legality of people who, right now, we have a manager form of government, and we have people that are underneath that are already established. And the question is, are their jobs, what protections do they have? And I think that that's going to be really important if this goes through, because we have current staffing. And what's going to happen to those individuals' jobs? I don't know all of the city's HR policies. And like at the state, you're somewhat protected on some ways, but I don't know if in this form of government, if that would be the same for employees that are within the city right now.
Okay.
Yeah, similarly, I would have a question of, would we be running afoul of any kind of HR issues if folks were to be terminated as a result of a mayoral appointment of someone in place of the current directors. I also do wonder, for example, we have deputy city managers. Are there equivalent positions within the strong mayor form of government? And what would those positions be?
So there are forms of those positions in these types of governments. However, a lot of those positions would depend on restructuring. So going back to look at how Minneapolis did it, they ended up forming the work group and then restructured their entire form of government under that specific work group. To give additional context to you all about that process and how that went, they did engage in a multitude of policy making where they came before City Council. They had study sessions, markup, amendments, and public hearings to kind of figure out the structure. And according to Minneapolis, when the ballot was passed in November of 2021, it seems like they actually established their new government structure in October of 2022. So this was not an immediate 30-day process for them. I will say, what worked for Minneapolis, I don't know if that's going to work for our city. Every city is different, and every structure is different, so that would need to be something that would need to be determined within the city.
Excellent. Thank you. Councilmember Marcano?
Yeah, I think just to add on to some of the comments that have already been made, I'd really be curious to know what staff turnover looks like in strong mayor forms of government versus council manager forms of government. Maybe frequency of any labor disputes, service disruptions, things of that nature. Because one of my biggest concerns with this form of government is the potential for nepotism and favoritism when you have one person having that much power. So I'd like to kind of examine what that looks like, especially how that would impact our residents and the services that depend on every day.
Thank you, Councilmember Marcano. Councilmember Lawson, do you have any further comments? Okay, thank you. So with that, do we have any questions of Ms. Rogers from folks that are here in chambers? Okay, seeing none. And do we have any from folks that are online? Any hands raised?
None online.
Okay, great. Do we have any comments then? You don't have to sit up there while people do comments, but you can. Thank you. Do we have any comments that folks would like to make with respect to changing the city's form of government from a council manager form of government to a strong mayor form? Seeing none in the chambers, do we have any hands raised online? Okay, thank you. With that, we will conclude that portion of the agenda and we will move on to our commentary regarding the other ordinances. Last time I read the full language of each ordinance. I'm not going to do that because it can be a little lengthy. So I'm just going to state the title and then introduce the member who was sponsoring that item to give their overview of the item. So first, we have update charter language to be gender neutral. I am bringing forward this item for consideration. It covers a few sections of our city charter. For the most part, the city charter actually does use gender neutral language, but there are a few sections. One section, or a few sections on the city attorney that specifically refer to the city attorney as he or him, and a few that refer to the city manager as he or him. And so I think that it's obviously important to ensure that we're not specifying a gender for the folks that are in those roles. A person of any gender may serve as a city manager or a city attorney. And then for the other sections, they say he or she currently. And so we would change those sections to simply say they, in keeping with gender neutral and gender inclusive language. And the purpose for that is just that we're not specifying any gender whatsoever, where gender is not relevant to either a person's role in our city government or their role as a citizen in taking any action in that capacity. And so that's the purpose and justification, is just to be inclusive of all people, regardless of gender, in the way that our governing documents are written. So with that introduction given, are there any members of the public signed up to speak in person? I'll go ahead and let Ms. Gonzalez read the names of folks that have signed up to speak on this item. So when your name is called, please come down to the podium and you'll have 3 minutes to give comment. And you may ask direct questions of the committee and we will respond.
We have Arnie Schultz, followed by Matt Lynn.
I do not see Mr. Schultz in the chambers, so Mr. Lynn, if you'd like to come up.
Good evening, members. I'll keep my remarks on this item brief. I'm going to be longer-winded later on in this meeting, but I just wanted to say that I support these changes to modernize our city charter language and to ensure it's inclusive for everyone. I appreciate Councilwoman Coombs for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gonzalez, do we have any further speakers on this item?
We do not.
In person? Okay. Mr. Bryant, do we have any further speakers on this item online?
We have no hands raised online.
Okay, thank you so much. Members of the committee, any comments before we move on? Okay, great, thank you. So we will move on to the next item, which is ballot question for even numbered years. Councilmember Marcano.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Coombs. So this proposal is, as the title states, would move our elections to even years beginning in 2026, if I'm not mistaken, and then again in 2028. So what that would do is it would ensure, it would require those who are elected this November to run again in 26. So you'd have a 3-year term, so no one's getting a longer term out of the deal. And then those who would run in 2025 to run again in 2028. So the same thing applies there. They get a 3-year term. And then from then on, we'd go back to 4-year terms with elections every 2 years. The rationale for this is pretty straightforward. It's a voter engagement and turnout boost for our city. For those of y'all who might not know, our participation in municipal elections is very, very poor. We average around 30% turnout, whereas for presidential and other years, on even years, we have turnout that ranges between 60 to 80%. So that's a substantial portion of our population for who, one reason or another, does not have their voice heard on, frankly, from my perspective, and I might be a little biased, the most important level of government because we touch, our residents' lives on a daily basis. So there are other cities in Colorado, including Castle Rock, Parker, and most recently Boulder, that now have their elections on even years. And what I can tell you from Castle Rock and Parker is that their participation for municipal races increases by orders of magnitude. They used to have lower turnout. Now it is up in, I think the delta is about 2% between what they vote at the top of the ticket and how they vote for their local races. One of my big concerns when I brought this forward was that we would see a drop-off in participation as the ballot went on, but that has not been the case. So I'm very excited about that because I think it's important that all of our residents have their voices heard from president all the way down to their council members. So yeah, that's a short and sweet version of the proposal, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
All right, do we have any speakers signed up to speak in chambers?
We have Arnie Schultz, followed by Matt Lynn.
All right, and once again, I do not see Mr. Schultz, so we'll go ahead and let Mr. Lynn come up.
Thank you, members of the committee. So the National Civic League, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization focused on civic engagement, reports the following. Quote, changing the timing of local elections to even years aligned with major election cycles is the strategy with the greatest proven impact on voting in local races. The group identifies a number of additional strategies to bolster voter participation in local elections, including the removal of various barriers that have been shown to have disenfranchising effects on citizens, but the move to even year elections tops that list. This is borne out in data from cities who've already made the switch, and it's well documented in peer-reviewed research. Also documented is the fact that these off-year elections tend to be disproportionately decided by white, wealthy homeowners. Groups like renters, people of color, are far less likely to vote in our off-year elections. I think this is an especially relevant point for Aurora, one of Colorado's most diverse cities. So while presidential elections and elections held to choose our DC delegation are certainly important, we know that some of the most impactful political decisions, those that have the most visible, tangible impact on our lives, they happen right here in this room. As a citizen of Aurora, it's my hope that every member of this council, regardless of where they might fall on the political spectrum, would share the goal of making this body as representative of the population as it possibly can be. Some voters, or even members of this council, may bring up concerns about lumping our local elections in with national elections and that might decrease the focus on local issues or candidates. As Councilman Marcano alluded to, that has not been the case in peer cities. We also live in the great state of Colorado where we can spend time with our ballot at home and take the time needed to research candidates and local matters in addition to national election matters. Others may raise issue with the cost of implementing this change. I believe we heard from the city clerk in a public hearing last month that this shift could represent an investment on the order of up to $200,000 to $300,000. I did have a question as to whether that cost reflected an annual recurring cost or if that was a one-time investment. I don't know if the clerk would be willing to speak to that.
Sure. Ms. Rodriguez, can you comment on the frequency of that cost change for elections?
Yes, it is not just a one-time cost. So if we coordinate for even election years, that would cost us significantly more money because the Arapahoe County has to have more voter service polling centers. So it would be approximately the same as what I laid out previously, 300,000 for even numbered years, 70,000 for odd numbered years.
And Clerk Rodriguez, if I can ask a follow-up. So we recently approved a contract with the Arapahoe County for election services, and we have one voter service polling center for our upcoming municipal race. Is that correct?
That is not technically correct. Yes, they will use one city-owned facility, but they will use different facilities with different jurisdictions.
All right, thank you. And then how many city facilities and total VSPCs would be available during an even year?
And so for an even year for the city-owned facilities, I believe there's approximately 7 that they're using for city-owned facilities that we are in agreement with them. But there's about 32 total VSPC locations for an even numbered year and 7 for an odd numbered year.
All right, thank you. And the reason I asked that was just for context as to what that cost is actually paying for. And I have to wonder if part of the reason we have such poor participation in our odd years is because we don't have the facilities that we do during even years.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that clarity.
Yeah, please proceed.
I would just argue that that's a more than worthwhile public investment, even given the recurring cost. It's a worthy use of taxpayer funds, given the ROI we'll see in terms of increased votership. I mean, it's dramatic when you look at the change when it's made. As a point of reference, the city of Aurora currently spends conservatively more than 6 times this amount every year to displace its unhoused from corner to corner. So I think this is a worthwhile use of our funds. Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have additional speakers in person?
We do. Give me just a moment. We have John Hutchinson.
John Hutchinson, please go ahead and come down to the podium.
Just real quick, I came in support of this part. I wanted that there will be more voter turnout by having it on even years, and I think that's worth it.
All right. Thank you so much for coming to speak this evening. Do we have any additional in-person speakers? Anybody in person who was not signed up that wishes to give comment? Okay, seeing none, do we have any online speakers?
No online questions.
Okay, thank you. And I did have one follow-up regarding the cost increase for Clerk Rodriguez. And maybe you know or don't. So I know you've said before that the cost increase is based on our share of the increased number of voters that need to be served. If other municipalities also moved their elections to even years, would that cost be divided up across those other cities?
Yes, so it would be the weighted population average, which is calculated by taking the total jurisdiction active registered voters. And you divide that by the sum of active registered voters for all of the coordinating entities. So that's the weighted population average. And at the end of the election, they take the total election expense and multiply it by that number, the weighted population average, to get what was total due from each jurisdiction.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that clarification. Do we have further questions or comments from other members? Councilmember Lawson?
I just have a question for City Clerk Rodriguez. So on that point about the population, are you looking, is it done every year or during when the census is conducted?
So they are taking the active registered voters. So it would not deal with the census number. It would deal with the active registered voters for each jurisdiction.
I was just wondering, because when you said population, so I just wanted to make sure that how that correlated with what you just stated. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Councilmember Lawson. Councilmember Marcano?
Thank you. Clerk Rodriguez, I have a follow-up. So what you say, the weighted population average is based off of the active registered voters. So are they looking at folks who are generally flagged as active in the Secretary of State's voter database, or are they looking at what effectively would be a measure of our turnout for even years versus odd years?
No, they are taking that number from the Secretary of State's system
Okay, thank you.
for active registered voters, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your questions. So now we will move on to the ballot question regarding partisan elections. Councilmember Marcano.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Coombs. So this item, as the name implies, is to make our races, I would add, transparently partisan. Because from my time on council and observing council for the last nearly decade, it is a partisan institution. It just is not broadcast as much on the ballot. So what this would do is simple. Basically, if you are a member of a major party, as recognized by the Secretary of State's office, that affiliation would appear on the ballot. And this would have the effect of, number one, voter transparency, which I think is very important. And number two, would also have a more modest but still significant voter engagement boost. As data shows that the more information we're able to provide to our residents or to the electorate, the more folks are actually willing to turn in a ballot because they feel like they have enough information to make a decision. And with that, I am happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, do we have folks signed up to speak in person?
We have Arnie Schultz, followed by Matt.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on to Mr. Lind because Mr. Schultz is not here.
I'm also in support of this charter change. I just want to say that I agree that voters deserve more transparency than they're currently given. And to those who believe that city government should stay out of partisan politics, I don't necessarily disagree, but I'm afraid that was a bridge that was crossed many years ago, if we were ever on the other side of the river, if we can extend that metaphor. But Aurora citizens deserve honesty about the affiliation of the candidates vying for their vote, if such an affiliation exists. I know it may not in all cases, especially if those purported nonpartisan candidates are going to receive funding from decidedly partisan groups who in recent years have poured a lot of dark money into our elections. Going back to something that was discussed at the prior charter public comment session, and this may have already occurred, but I do feel it may be helpful to bifurcate this question from the issue of vacancy committees. It sounds like that's already occurred. So I don't have a strong stance on either vacancy committee approach, but I just felt that that would be helpful to separate that question on the ballot for the sake of clarity. And I'm in support of this change, so thank you.
All right, thank you so much for coming to speak. Do we have additional speakers signed up to speak in person?
We have Susan Tabachek, followed by John Hutchinson.
Okay. Ms. Tabachek?
She asked me when we were going to, she said that we need a ramp. I was like, good news. So I described to her what's happening.
In process. Yeah, we need to get an update on that.
I talked to Laura about it in the garage on the way out yesterday. So she said she's going to get some update.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, council members. I had a concern with this because I believe in this last election, we all knew where everybody was coming from. We all knew who was Republican, and we all knew who was Democrat. Most I did. So, and that's concerning, because then we have that other group of individuals who really don't want to let people know who their party is, you know. And so I feel it should stay the way it is. I disagree with making it partisan. I disagree with making vacancies partisan, because then we're going to be overloaded with Republican or we're going to be overloaded with Democrats. I mean, I'm not saying either one, okay? I just feel it's becoming too much. Although Am I wrong about who we knew was a Democrat and a Republican this last election?
So
By the information that went out to the public? I saw it on public, I saw it on the, what do you call it? Advertisements or whatever that came out of who was Democrat, who was Republican. You know, y'all do a really good job. I'm just saying that I really did, my big part, the vacancy part, say one of you should leave, that to me is very concerning, that one group is going to be able to overload.
Yep. So I will say that we did hear anecdotally from residents that they were being told by individuals that they were a different party than what they actually were on the doors. That's from what a few people said. There's no kind of, pattern that's been demonstrated on that, but that is something that folks did say occurred. As far as the vacancies, that is now a separate item with a different process, which Councilmember Marcano will talk about
Okay.
In the next
But
item.
when it comes to the elections, I agree. Let's be honest and upfront, because y'all have been that way for years. So, we all know who's who. I mean, the majority of people who vote knows who's who. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll be back on the other one.
Okay, awesome. We look forward to hearing from you more, and we appreciate your participation. Mr. Hutchinson?
I'm in support of this change. I think it gives more information to voters. I think that some people would be tending not to vote if they're not sure. And some people use there's different colors for the parties, and some of them use the ink from the different color for each. I just think that gives, that allowing it to be partisanship. The only thing that, one thing is like as a precinct and at the party level, you're not allowed to say we endorse this candidate, and would that be changed?
That is not something that is within the charter or that would be in the purview of this. I think that's more electioneering provisions, which
Okay.
it's not clear whether the campaign finance law, kind of what the interaction is of the campaign finance laws with parties in that sense. I think that that's kind of up to the party's own rules, how they're managing campaign finance laws within cities. So that's a thing within the parties, not something that the city government would decide.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. Any other commenters in person? Anybody who did not sign up? Sir?
I signed up, but I forgot to check the box.
Okay. Well, please state your name for the record when you come up.
Good evening, my name is Kelly Schilling.
Oh.
I am opposed to this. I'll tell you why. I've been a born witness to this council's activities for now more than 40 years. I guess a long time ago I crossed the line into old man. And I'm disappointed to report that this council has operated more partisanly, particularly in the last 3 years, than I've ever witnessed in my time here with Aurora. I've presented to this council. I've attended various meetings. I've served on boards and commissions. And it's disappointing that council meetings have become acrimonious, calling members out in the public forum. I enjoy the fact that whether it's a great farce or not, that people are supposed to be nonpartisan to serve this city. And I would appreciate the fact that if that they could continue to do so, and that we could enjoy the benefits of people setting their politics aside and represent the interests of the citizens of Aurora. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I think we do have a speaker slip for you, it sounds like. So thank you so much for your comments. Any other speakers in person that did not sign up? Okay, seeing none. Do we have any speakers online for this item?
No speakers online.
Okay, any questions or comments from members of the committee? Councilmember Lawson?
I just have a comment, so I'm not for this at all. I understand, I think the partisanship has definitely, I've been on the council for 8 years, and I've definitely seen a significant difference in how this council operates. I hope if this does pass and the voters do decide, I hope that you look at the people who are actually, that you're actually, even whether they're a D, R, I, whatever, it's important to look at the people that you're voting for and what they're, and if they definitely have a record, look at that. But just voting for someone because they're a D or an R or an I mean, really hope that people, if this passes through, the voters, to want this, to have these elections partisan, that you really look at the people, because people may not be what they appear. So that's just all I want to make a comment on that.
Okay, Councilmember Marcano? Okay, and I have no comments either. So we will go ahead and move forward to the ballot question regarding vacancy committees. Councilmember Marcano.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Coombs. So this is my final item on here, and it has been bifurcated, as one of our speakers pointed out. So the original proposal was, there's two different sections. One is assuming partisan positions through which we would utilize for a vacancy the existing vacancy committee process that, again, parties through the Secretary of State's office utilize to fill a vacancy. So what that looks like are precinct organizers would get together and basically fill that vacancy after however many candidates apply to basically fill that vacancy. So it would be not up to council to fill the vacancy, but up to the precinct organizers. The second proposal that I have in here, and quite frankly, it's the one I'm leaning the most toward after getting feedback from my colleagues and also from members of the public, is the utilization of our nominating petitions as our vacancy committees, which, just for the record, is the same process that unaffiliated candidates if they should have office at the state legislature, that's the process that they utilize for their vacancies. So that would be regardless of whatever party a member of council is, whether it's partisan or not. The 50-plus people who sign a ward council member's petition, or the 100-plus people who sign a at-large council member or mayor's petition, they would make up the vacancy committee for that seat. And the idea is that the values should stay with the voters. So the voters should get to decide who serves on council, not council members. As we saw, this was used for pretty nakedly partisan reasons when Councilmember Johnston vacated her seat in the past. And frankly, we should not be in a position, from my perspective, to ever decide who gets to sit up here with us. That power should rest with you, the people of our city.
All right, do we have any members of the public signed up to speak in person?
We have Arnie Schultz, followed by Matt Lynn.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to Matt Lynn.
I had sort of roped in my remarks on this matter in the last one, so I was just going to say that I don't have a preference on which of the two approaches are taken of the two, but I do feel like it is a good idea for the reasons Councilman Marcano explained, that we want to avoid the scenario that we saw occur a few years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have additional speakers signed up to speak in person?
Susan Tabachek.
Okay, Ms. Tabachek, please come down. Well, we need a ramp, and we are working on that.
Yeah, there will be improvements to the chambers hopefully soon.
Good evening again. Thank you for letting me speak.
Of course.
I'm against it, and the reason I'm against it, as I stated, is that once a party person has gone, I believe a party person should be come back on. And the reason is you're going to overload. I know in certain wards here in Aurora, I've lived here a long time, it's going to go all one way. I can guarantee you it's going to go all one way. And that's not right. So it'll go, I mean, we all know, I'm just going to say it out loud. We all know that Aurora is a Democrat city. The majority of the people that live here are Democrat. And it's very hard for a Republican to get elected. I was surprised to see as many Republicans that did get elected this time, seriously. So if that were to happen, I know how the different parties work. I've been around both parties. And I know what they'll do to get that other party to overload this council. And I'm not saying that you're not bipartisan, that you're not nonpartisan, because I understand when you have a conflict, you have a conflict, and that's okay. Because if everybody agreed, that would be terrible. You know, I really think everybody should have a voice, whether you agree with each other or not. And so you get angry, so what, you know? But the thing of it is, you come out with some very good, I won't say the word, you come out with good decisions as a group if you really put your heads together. I think you've all done a good job, even though you nitpick at each other and all this stuff. That's, you know, we're in that day and age. But I disagree with you, totally. I think it should stay. If a Republican leaves, a Republican comes back in. If a Democrat leaves, a Democrat comes back in. I do not know if that was what you were saying. Is that what you were saying?
So let me clarify, because there's two proposals in this, right? So one of them assumes partisan positions like you're describing. But what I've heard from my colleagues and some members of the public is they don't want to utilize that. You know, not everyone's a fan of having party affiliation on the ballot, right? And I tend to disagree with wanting to hide that from voters, but it is what it is. The partisan position, it would function the way you describe. That's how those vacancy committees are set up. So statutorily, you have Democratic precinct organizers. So if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, they would put a Democrat in my seat because I'm a Democrat.
Or if you had, what's that other party called? I can't think.
Yeah, or if something happened to Mayor Kaufman, a Republican vacancy committee comprises.
And not just a Republican, the third party. Could be a Green party, it could be
yeah, so
you never know.
Councilmember Lawson is unaffiliated.
Yeah,
so
it could be that. If she left, we would have an unaffiliated.
Well, not quite, because there's not unaffiliated as in the party, right? And this is where we get kind of
that's true.
confused between nonpartisan versus unaffiliated, right?
Yeah,
nonpartisan just means you don't see our party. Unaffiliated means you don't belong to a party.
But I could see all Democrats up here. At my point of view right now, as I sit here, and if you go your way, I could see all Democrats up here, maybe except for one or two. And that's because I know Aurora. I've worked for both parties. I can tell you. And that's just how I feel. So no, I'm against it. I think you guys are great. I'm just against it.
Okay. Well, to clarify though, because what you were saying was actually supportive of the partisan vacancy process.
Partisan.
How do you feel about the nominating petition then? Because I'll speak to my experience. When I got my signatures, it was from people who I know are Democrats, who I know personally in my ward. So I have a big community, I have a big base of support, so that's who I went to get my signatures. So with this other process, they'd be the ones that would fill my position anyway.
But if it were a Republican, I can guarantee it would be a Democrat that would fill it.
Well, no, because, it depends on how they got their signatures, right? Because if someone's standing outside of a grocery store and just asking whoever to sign their signature.
I just really know how it works.
It depends on how they did it, right? Because you're right, if it's random people, it could very well be that. But what I can tell you is that my colleagues are also sophisticated folks. They belong to a party. They have their organizational structure supporting them as well. So I sincerely doubt that you'd have a Democrat replace Mayor Kaufman, for example, if there were a vacancy.
I was on the school board, and the majority of my people who backed me were Democrats. okay? And not a lot of Republicans, okay? I'm not going to tell you what party I am, but I'm just going to tell you, I think if a Democrat moves, a Democrat should come. If a Republican comes, now who are you saying picks that Republican? The party?
Yeah, that, under the
The
first
Republican
proposal.
Party would pick the Republican that
The
that
precinct
comes.
organizers for the Republican Party.
Right, and the Democratic Party would pick for the Democrats, right?
Under the
And I
first
don't know
proposal.
what's going to happen to you.
So it would be it would be the petition signatures, no matter what, for an
Yeah.
unaffiliated
Okay.
person. So the way that Councilmember Marcano laid out the second proposal was to kind of cut out the parties themselves and just use use the petition signatures for everybody. So if you're an unaffiliated, it's petition signatures. If you're a Republican, it's the people who signed your petition. If you're a Democrat, it's the people who signed your petition. And I think the idea is people probably are getting people of their own party to sign their petition if
Right.
they're a member of a party. And if you're
Right.
unaffiliated, you're probably getting both and some unaffiliated. It's probably
And see-
a more wide sample.
Who works, the Republican Party really, okay, I'm a Republican, and the Republican Party does not work that much in poor Aurora. You know, I'm in Aurora. We're called poor Aurora. I really live in poor Aurora, personally. So, once those petitions go out, if any of them leave on that, with the vacancy necessary, and we're going to go according to your way, it's going to go Democrat. My personal opinion. But I just wanted to give you what I think. A Republican comes for a Republican, a Democrat comes for a Democrat, and that's how it is. In my eye, and I appreciate, like I said, though, I appreciate y'all.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. I think it's important to clarify those questions and to have the discussion, and we appreciate hearing your voice.
Yes, and for the record, I agree with you.
So, any other folks signed up to speak in public on this item? Anybody interested in speaking on this item that's present that didn't already speak? All right, come on up. And you did sign a form, right? Yes, okay.
I guess I'm generally opposed to that reform measure. It smacks to me like we're driving party politics down to the lowest level of government that we have. And I find that unfortunate. I like the idea, naive perhaps I am, that if an unaffiliated person, I'm unaffiliated, would get hit by a bus, that there's a chance that that could be filled by another unaffiliated person. Party politics, in my mind's eye, has the polar opposites have started to dominate every aspect of politics, and pushing that down to the lowest level means that there's just more for us to swallow, and for me, that all tastes better.
Appreciate that. Can I ask you a clarifying question? So that was about having the partisan vacancy
Well,
committees?
even the I call it petition gathering, but the signature basis, you're going to go to your base, you would try to find a base. Republicans, and it's just party politics, because it's just easier. If everybody had to stand out at King Soopers and just grab people as they come by, I could get right with that. But it's just party politics is going to drive and grow, and we don't need more divides. Now, granted, maybe there are some excesses, and maybe it was unfortunate how the last vacancy was filled. I'll grant you that. But in the history of my tenure here and observations, that has not been the process, because there are relatively few people who want to immediately step up and assume that role, or perhaps are even qualified to come in and be an effective member of council right from the get-go. And the process that we have now vets those people to some large extent, at least historically. And I don't see a reason to change that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions I can answer?
No, I just wanted to make sure, because it's a little bit of confusion.
It
We're getting
absolutely
your
is,
full-
and this discussion has been great. I generally appreciate you're willing to engage with us and to talk it through.
Yeah, absolutely, and we appreciate you taking the time to come and join us and share your thoughts. comments and questions from members. Councilmember Lawson?
Yeah, I just have a comment. So it was unfortunate how that vacancy went with our former council member. But what I have to say is when you're talking about the values, in these wards, there's people moving in and out. So values could change amongst, people. A ward may not be the same, have the same values, or they may not have liked what the council member did, and they may want somebody different. So when we're talking about the values of what that council member represented, if I'm unaffiliated and I have a vacancy, there could be someone from a Republican, Democrat, or an unaffiliated. I would think that the values of what that ward or that person, it could be different. Our city is growing. We have different people, elections, different people who are a part of the city. And values are just different. Wards are different. And I think that's only going to continue. So I don't really agree with the argument about the values of the certain council member that represents the city at a ward level or at large level. So.
Thank you. Councilmember Marcano?
Thank you. And thank you for your comments, Councilmember Lawson. But maybe I should clarify that the importance is that the values of the voters are what, be represented, not so much the values of the person. And that's why I feel like the folks who signed your nominating petition are probably the better arbiters of that than, the 10 of us who would be sitting up here making that decision after the fact.
Well, I wasn't referencing that per se, that us making that decision. But what I'm saying is that if you go, the nominating petitions that we have, a lot of those people may be here or may not. But I'm just talking about when we were having that discussion, yeah, that wasn't it really should be with the voters because they are our bosses. They are our bosses. So, but just because someone is a Democrat of a ward, that ward could be changed or different. So are we really listening to the voices of those voters in that ward? I'm just saying the changing dynamics, and that has to be in consideration.
All right, and the only thing I'll say is that I do support having some type of vacancy committee for the specific reason that I don't think that council should make that decision. That's only 10 people. Yes, 10 people who are elected, but having a broader range of people to weigh in, I think is more appropriate, especially having the voters, not the elected officials. Oftentimes there's internal council politics that inform those decisions of who ends up getting appointed, and I don't think that that necessarily serves the voters best. In addition, I did want to clarify one thing that came up before, which is that the ward council members have to have at least 50 signatures, and Councilmember Marcano did say 50 plus in this case, but so oftentimes people get 2 or 3 times the number of signatures that they need just to make sure that they get onto the ballot, because it'd be really unfortunate if you missed the ballot by one signature that was illegible or someone wrote their zip code wrong or something like that. So what would end up happening is that we would have more than that 50 for a ward or 100 for citywide elections that would be making that decision. And I think that's also beneficial for addressing one of the other concerns that came up in the discussion, and that was what would happen if a lot of the people who signed your petition had moved out of the ward or out of the city. So because we have more than just that 50 minimum that end up signing, it would give us still a larger number of people that end up sitting on that vacancy committee. So I just wanted to make that informational clarification from our previous discussions. Are there any other folks that at this point would like to come up and speak who have not spoken that are here in person? Okay, and then do we have any folks prepared to comment online? We have none online. Okay, so thank you all for the discussion and to the folks who came to speak. And now we will move on to the ordinance regarding full-time council members with Councilmember Lawson.
The real controversial one at the very end. I brought this forward. This proposed charter change merely confirms the reality of serving on our city council in the present day and age. So as the city has grown in 62 years since the adoption of the charter, the responsibility and obligations of the city council members has basically grown. And it's probably only going to grow more. As right now we're at a current population of 400,000. I would see probably in another 10 years will be probably a little bit higher than that, close to maybe even at least Colorado Springs growth. I just wanted to, before I just kind of wanted to create a landscape. You know, council members, this is a public service job, and a lot of us know what we're getting into when we serve here as a council member. A lot of us have full-time jobs because we have to. We can't support ourselves with the money that we have here that we get for, which is like $23,000 right now, or $20,000 for council members right now, and then $22,000 for the mayor pro tem, and then the mayor gets $86,000 right now currently. So that is the current money that we get right now in this current day and age. You know, council members, a lot of people, I think, and a lot of us, we go out into the community and explain what council members do. It's not just sitting up on the dais on Mondays, and it's not just our, you know, our weekly, our study session meetings. I mean, we attend regular meetings. On top of that, we have executive proceeding meetings that we have to attend. In addition, we sit on one policy committee that we chair, and we have to sit on 2 additional policy committees by our rules. And then on top of that, we have additional committees, external committees that we sit on. I know I sit on 7 just external. So I sit on a total of 10 just all together. We have our town hall meetings, which, you know, that several of our board, you know, for public safety, for regional development, for RTD, many things, mental health, we sit on amongst, those are just kind of the variety of boards. We're not directly involved in many, we're directly involved in many mandatory meetings. Sometimes we have emergency meetings that we have to attend. I mean, and we also have meetings that we have to do with our budget on the weekends. I mean, it's a lot. And on top of that, we have to prepare for our council meetings. We do not have staff. We have people and our staff that kind of help us but not do the research and the questions that we have to prepare for these meetings so we can be, you know, more informed about what's going on. And on top of that, we have constituency services, which is really important. And that it means not just reading emails, but that means going out to people and actually going out and seeing what's going on in communities. You know, we stand ready at any time for any unscheduled meetings, and that has happened on multiple times. I've been on council for 8 years. Councilmember Marcano and Councilmember Coombs have also been a part of those, especially during COVID. We were on additional meetings every week, unscheduled meetings that we had to attend because we had to deal with the COVID issue in our city. So I share this in the backup. If anyone saw the backup, there were some options for the compensation. And I really would like for the compensation to go over to probably our commission. But there's 2 options there. One of the options would be for council to have $42,000. So that would be the 4 council members who right now would increase to $42,000. And then $59,000 for the mayor pro tem. I think the mayor pro tem one is still a little bit much compared to what the 42 is based on this analysis. But looking at what Aurora's, wages are, that's kind of how I would look for the comparable one for an increase. Someone was asking me, some constituents asked me, well, how would you, because there is no moonlighting provision in this ordinance. So people who need to work, who want to keep their jobs, they can do that. There is nothing saying that it's mandated that you have to quit your job to be a full-time council person. That would be something that you would have to decide on your own, based on your own financial or whatever you have to do for your families. But there wouldn't be when I talk to our city attorney's office, there's nothing in the charter that I can put in there that would be that a council member would have to attend a certain amount of meetings, or they would have to be obligated to do a certain amount of thresholds. Because basically, the citizens of Aurora are our bosses. And through recall and other things, that's how you would actually be able to challenge us to see if we're meeting these thresholds to be a full-time council person. So within this charter amendment, there's not anything that I could say that says, oh, a person's not doing the work versus a person's doing their job. That is something I was asked by constituents, and looking at the legal provision, basically I was told the residents of Aurora evaluates at each election the performance of their elected officials. Elections are at council members' performance evaluation delivered from their bosses, the residents of Aurora. So I would like to hear any comments. I know that this one has been kind of controversial. Some people think that, well, some of my colleagues think, well, we are public servants and we should be part-time and it shouldn't be any changes. But as we're growing as a city and as we're seeing the complexity of the issues that are continuing to develop and we're continuing to grow, it's going to be more time that council members are going to have to, if we're going to be true public servants, to be able to serve the needs of our residents. So that's why I'm bringing this proposal forward. I've been working on this for a couple years, but decided to bring it forward to see if there's a possibility that it could be on the ballot. And if the voters say no, then the voters say no. But I think it should be something that should be proposed and let the voters decide if they want us to be a full-time council. So that's my presentation, and if there's any questions and comments, I would be glad to take those.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Lawson. I would add on the committees that we also have ad hoc committees. This is an ad hoc committee, so it's a fourth committee for those of us serving. And I think all of us have been on at least one, if not two, ad hoc committees for each of the years on our times on council. So just adding to the number of committee meetings that we have. That being said, do we have members signed up to speak in public or in person?
We have Arnie Schultz, followed by Matt Lynn.
Okay, Mr. Schultz is not here, so Mr. Lynn, please come up.
First of all, thank you for bringing this forward. I know it puts you as council members in sort of an awkward position that the nature of lawmaking states that you must ask for your own raise, at least to get the conversation going. I think it is merited to serve a community of this size, as you've alluded to, and to address the complexity and the sheer number of issues in a city as large as Aurora. A council member could easily dedicate full-time hours to this role, and I know that many of you already do. There are only 50 cities in the country that are larger in terms of Aurora, larger than Aurora in terms of population, and our council is part-time. Regarding salary, so at the current level of $20,000 a year, let's assume a part-time schedule of 25 hours per week, knowing full well that your commitment often extends further than that, that comes out to $15 an hour. That's not great. Area median income for Arapahoe County is just over $45,000 per capita. That's about $22 an hour. So you can see we've already got a gap there, just to put you all in kind of the realm of average. As a point of reference, the median household income for Arapahoe County is close to $85,000. Another factor to consider, and I really think that this needs to be highlighted to voters when we put this forth, is that when we begin to hear concerns about the cost, or, oh, this should be a matter of public service and you shouldn't be, I don't know, in this for the money, or I don't think any of you are in this for the money, but when people start to bring those concerns forth, it is important that we reiterate that when you do not pay a living wage for public service, you limit the pool of available talent for elected officials. You should not need to be independently wealthy to sit in this room, or rely on a spouse's income, or moonlight a second full-time job, but currently you do. And this, like off-year elections, promotes a system of municipal government that does not represent its people. It promotes inequity. And I really think that needs to be highlighted far and above the concerns that we're going to hear about cost, because those are going to, I can already hear some of our members bringing those concerns. So with the above in mind, I think a salary increase would certainly be merited alongside the consideration to move council members to full-time status. It seems like 100% AMI seems like a more than reasonable place to start. 42,000 sounds low to me. I'm a renter. I pay market rate rent in Aurora. If my job paid me 42,000, I don't think I could live here. I don't know where I would live if I had to subsist on that salary. So I would consider something higher, but it's a good place to start. I support this change. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have other members of the public signed up to speak in person?
We have Mohammed Faisal, followed by Susan Tabachek.
Okay.
And Mohammed is online.
Okay. Please go ahead, Mohammed.
Is Mohammed Faisal. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're on.
Yes. It is when I heard this, the city council job it's a part-time job. It's really hurt me. When I saw their salary, their compensation is very low. I think so. If we can offer them full-time job and better pay for our council member, mayor, who is working over there. It is better for our city because of they can focus the full time of their job. Please, what you can do, you can propose it to the next election on to the November, then propose it. And another thing I had to do I am very choose about that ranking choice voting. If you can implement it, I think so we can better our candidate. So please think about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for taking the time to comment in person or online. And now we will have Susan Tabachek. And once again, we really need to get that ramp in here.
But this time, I'm for this 100% because you take care of our lives, our health, our safety. You make the decisions for that. I can't believe that it's so low and that's so bad, and I guess I should have looked into it, but I think 42,000 is low. I think it should be higher because of the job you're required to do. Thank goodness we have people on council that really care about us, because you could all be sitting there going, oh, I've been in places and belonged to clubs where the people in charge really didn't care, they just wanted money. So 100%, I can't believe that we won't do this, but you are our life. My life is good because you are here. And for that reason, 100%, you need to be full-time. And it's okay if you have another job. Other people have other jobs, plus their full-time job. So 100%. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for your comments. I did want to say regarding the kind of salary and limiting the pool of talent that had been brought up, I have had many people that I've spoken with say, I would love to serve on council, I'd love to represent the community, but I cannot afford to. That's not a salary that I can afford to live off of, and I can't do council plus my other job, right? Some of us have some flexibility where our other job allows us to balance both, but not everybody's job allows that. So there are people who would be willing to leave their other very good jobs to serve on council if it at least paid a living wage. So that's just something that I have heard in community. So Councilmember Lawson?
Yeah, and thank you, Councilmember Coons, for bringing this up. And I just wanted to say in the backup, there's actually two options. The second one, the first one that I mentioned, the $42,316, that was using compensation data from other comparable cities outside of Colorado that have a city and council manager form of government. The next option would be $67,889 for a council member. And that's HR's job evaluation, analysis, and recommendation, considering current duties, responsibilities, compensation, and classification structure, and local and out-of-state comparable market data. So, again, like Councilmember Coombs said, that would to me would be something that would be where people could actually live, serve here, and maybe have a choice, because that's what it's about, choice. If you have to do another job, you do that. But if you don't, and I also think it would bring, this is the future. So this might not impact us, but this will be future. And I think that we have to think about that when we're looking at how our city is growing and just who's going to be representing our city in the future. And to have those diverse opinions and thoughts is really important, but sometimes people can't do it. You can't get that, maybe, because people can't afford to do this work here at $20,000. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Lawson.
We still have for public invited to be heard, Robert Garson, followed by Tanya Tabachek.
Oh, I apologize. I thought we had gotten to the end of our folks, and we were very enthusiastic to give comment. Bob, please go ahead.
Bob Geiser. As you know, I was a city council member of the city county of Broomfield. I was on probably 60 different committees that I went to. I also did full-time work as a county commissioner, attending the county commissioner meetings. My salary was $7,200 a year. So I know exactly how much work you put in. County commissioners are paid, I think, $90,000 a year. So I think that the 67 that you have listed here is a little low. I know there's so much that you can contribute. There's citizens groups that you would like to attend. There's county meetings that you would like to attend to get more information. There's vast numbers of committees and community associations that you could attend if you had the salary to pay. And I know it's a tremendous amount of work, and I thank you all for the work that you put in, because it's a lot of work for what you get paid, and you really need to think about upping that a little more.
Thank you so much, Bob. All right, Tanya?
This is different. Usually I can only talk and don't get questions asked like this. I'm supportive of this. I know that some people that, I like my job, I do, but if I had opportunity to serve the residents and so forth with what you get paid right now, there's no way I could do that. And with the amount of work that I see you guys do all the time in the pre-study meetings and council, and then I see the different committees you're part of, and then also you go to other meetings outside to, like for NARF with my mom or TRIA or so forth, that you're not obligated to, but you go to show your support and so forth. Yeah, and from what you're saying with the amount that, like I said, 20,000, the mayor gets 86,000. I mean, you guys do almost as much as what he does. I mean, you're up there. And like he was saying, more than 67,000, and people might not understand that. And until I came and my mom mentioned how much you get paid, I didn't know. A lot of citizens don't know. They see you up here like, okay, they don't know the whole, just in the background and the whole dynamic of the city council. And I think if they understood and understood the breakdown of it, then there wouldn't be a debate about it. And you're doing a public service, but you do a lot for our lives. Like if we have a water issue, you're the mediator. You're the in-between person that kind of pushes it through. So I'm all for it. And like I was saying with him, I think with the amount of work that you do, that would be more equivalent. It's a lot of work. And I know that I'm interested in someday, but with what I make now, I'm like barely at even with the medium, the household medium, and with the rent and so forth for a single house. So I'm in support of it. So thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak. Are there any other folks that would like to come speak in person? Please, come on up.
Well, lest you forget, I'm Kelly Schilling. And to get out of my negative rut, I'm all for this. You and your colleagues here are the executive committee of a $1 billion-plus organization, and it's time that you be dedicated to the efforts of the city full-time. Now, if you can balance a job in that too, hey, more power to you, but we need leadership here full-time. And your salary needs to be commensurate with your responsibilities. So whether that's $46,000 or $86,000, I would challenge you to do that and more, because if you're full-time, I would like to see you have time or dedicate resources to not only yourselves, but to a staff. You need some help. The legislative committees, they've all got staff, and not knocking the staff here at the City of Aurora. They do a terrific job. They carry a big burden, and they do a great job of keeping you informed, but it's a pool. And if you could hire your own people to assist with your efforts. Now, that probably kicks as hard as it shoots, because if you're going to do that, then I would challenge you to go forward and to liaison with the county commissioners and with our state representatives to advocate for the city. I'm tired of living in the shadows of the other organizations in our state, and the idea that we have a form of government here that's the equivalent of what they have in Elizabeth, Colorado, or Montrose, Colorado, or Julesburg, Colorado. Not knocking any of those cities, but we've outgrown that. And I hope that you really use this as a launching pad to drive us into the next 10 years, 15. If we don't get to this for another 60 years, please give us the kind of leadership, the kind of pay and remuneration responsibilities. A long time ago, this body was the launching pad for political careers. And I'd like to see that happen again. And if it's going to happen going forward, then we need to have this solved so that our future leaders can step forward and take us with them.
Thank you so much for your comments.
Questions?
No, I don't think I have any, although I appreciate the thoughtful comparisons. So do we have any other folks in person who are not signed up that want to speak on this item? Okay, do we have any more folks online to speak on this item?
No additional speakers online.
Okay, so I think we kind of launched into our commentary a little bit ahead of folks coming up, but I do thank you all for sharing that information. I did want to respond and add, we do also, one of our committees is fully tasked with advocating for the city in an intergovernmental capacity at the state legislature and with the counties. We do also have a representative and an alternate to the Denver Regional Council of Governments. So that is part of that work that we all do, different people at different times depending on their assignments. And then also the chair of the Federal, State, and Intergovernmental Relations Committee often testifies on behalf of council, and other members may also go and testify on behalf of their constituents, even if the position that they represent is not the same one that's held by council. So there is quite a bit of effort that folks do make to try to advocate for the city and make sure that we're well represented. So that's just an additional one of the many duties that we undertake. So additional comments, Councilmember Marcano?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. So I did have a question for Councilmember Lawson, and that is, when you were researching the moonlighting provision, I'm curious, what does the city and county of Denver do?
For their moonlighting
Yeah,
provision?
because they get paid like 140,000.
They get 100, yeah, I think they get 100.
Is it 100?
I don't know, I don't have it in front of me. I'm not sure if they're mandated or not. I would have to come back to you on that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious because
But they probably are not working another job.
I would certainly hope not, especially, you imagine our load, imagine adding a county load on top of that and then 300,000 more people, right? So yeah, I was just curious about that. I just want to say that I do support this. This is something that would not benefit any of the folks currently on council. But from my perspective, it's a matter of equity ultimately. As was mentioned, some folks are privileged enough to either to be independently wealthy or comfortably retired or to own a business or several businesses that they can derive more or less passive income from. That's not the case for the vast majority of Aurorans. So what we're doing with our existing structure is precluding a vast swath of representation from really having a shot at being able to serve their community and bring, frankly, a perspective that I think is very valuable and missing from council. So this is something that I hope we can at least send to the voters this November, because it's really important, I think, to expand not just the franchise. I know we've talked a lot about turnout and voting and transparency, but to also allow more people to actually serve in this role without taking on financial hardship for themselves and their families.
Thank you, Councilmember Marcano. There was something I was thinking that now.
Oh, I did want to say one thing.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I just did my taxes, and we got paid like $35,200 basically for the year.
I guess that's with.
That's with our allowances.
Allowances,
That's something that I think we haven't talked about in the past. So our charter salary, I think previous councils understood that that was very low and that there was a lot more to this job, so they added in a allowance. I think it's like a $700 car allowance, and then like there's another allowance that's just for general expenses.
Yeah.
And that's what gets you from, I think, our inflation-adjusted salary is like $20,000 and change right now. $20,000. Yeah, so that's what gets you to $35,000. So in my perspective, I would rather this be a transparent salary, no allowances, and my suggestion would be to just tie it to the median income for a family of four for the city, which I think is right around $69,000 a year. And I do want us to maybe take a look at the mayor pro tem and the mayor's salary as well, because I'm gonna be honest, Mayor pro tem, from my perspective, actually does less work because they don't have committees. There's a couple of things that they that they get assigned, but it's really no different than the extra committees that you and I take on. And the mayor's role also is interesting here because they don't have executive authority. They're a figurehead, more or less. So I think that bringing all of those positions either to the same or to the same general ballpark would be beneficial.
Yeah, so I would add, the mayor does not serve, is not required to serve on any of our policy committees. They are an ex officio member of every policy committee, but they're not required to attend, whereas we are required to attend the committees that we serve on. So that particular duty is not equivalent. And then depending on how outside committees get delegated to members of council, the mayor may or may not serve on very many outside committees. I think there may be one that specifically requires it to be the mayor, and all the rest permit a mayor's designee, and the majority of those are filled by council members. So in terms of the duties, the mayor definitely does not have 4 times the duties of council members and may not even have equivalent required duties, which leaves the mayor in the position of kind of their job, aside from chairing our study sessions, executive sessions, and council meetings, is up to their discretion in a way that council members' duties are not. So I agree that examining a little bit of pay equity there would make some sense. Any further comments, Councilmember Lawson?
No further comments.
Okay, neither do I. Do we have anything else from members of the public before we conclude this item? All right, thank you all again so much for your thoughtful commentary and your attendance. We do have one more item, but we don't have any additional suggestions that have been provided, or at least that were sent to us since our last set of responses from Access Aurora. So we will not review any additional items at this time. I did want to raise a question, however, of the other members of the committee, which is we have received one additional item that's coming to our May 2nd Charter Committee, and that's regarding lateral hires of firefighters. And I believe we're going to anticipate an item from the police department regarding lateral hires, as well as potentially some additional public safety related items to bring forward, not from us, not from the committee, but from staff. So I do want to ask if folks would be comfortable holding one additional public hearing after our May 2nd meeting to review those items with members of the public.
Yeah, I think that'll be important for us to do that, to have a hearing and get public perspective on those as well, and just to be transparent.
Ditto.
Okay, yeah, I think that those are essential topics related to public safety, so we do want to get public comment on those. So we will confer with staff and find out what's going to be a good time to have that one final public hearing sometime in the month of May. And we will publicize that final public hearing once we have that date set. So thank you both for your support of bringing that forward, and we hope that you all will be able to attend that as well. I think that, these are meaningful issues in terms of how we staff our police and fire departments. So with that being said, thank you all again for your long attention, your thoughtful commentary. Councilmember Marcano.
Yep, thank you. I did want to address a comment that was made by one of our call-in users about ranked choice voting. That's something that would not actually require a charter amendment. This is something that I have looked into as part of, some of the, I think, necessary electoral reforms in terms of transparency, encouraging voter participation, and things of that nature. But that can be done through simple ordinance. And I think it would actually speak a lot to some of the concerns that we've heard from members of the public about basically enshrining two-party rule and all that dysfunction, which I argue already exists here, but through making our races transparently partisan. The idea with ranked choice voting is that you basically eliminate the spoiler effect. So you're able to support independent candidates or minor party candidates to break the duopoly without, effectively, as happens now in the presidential years, as we've seen, where folks will vote for, let's say, the Libertarian because they don't like the Republican candidate, and then the Democrat ends up winning, right? So that would be the idea, and I would be curious to get some of your takes with that context on having partisan races, since one is a charter question, one is not, and how that might impact how you feel about that transition. Because I feel like, it's, go back to that old saying, right? The first step in fixing a problem is admitting you have one. So I would rather have this information be out there, transparent, and then give us the tools to address the problem if we feel there is one.
All right. So we will, I think, I don't know that we're going to have ranked choice voting conversation again, because that is a change that can happen by ordinance, not charter. So if we're going to have that conversation, we'll have that as part of an ordinance change in the future. I do not anticipate that will come forward before our next election. But yes, that has been raised in some of the online comments. So it is an issue that we're aware of, but it's something that is not specifically part of the charter. So with that said, again, thank you all for your time, your attention, your thoughtful commentary, your engagement, and we look forward to continuing to speak with you on the changes to the charter and hear from you as we move forward in our process. We do have more meetings of this committee. We have a citizens ad hoc committee that is also advising council on charter changes, and so a report from them will also come forward. And then we will be having discussions at a study session, as well as 2 full council meetings before any items go to the ballot. So there will be other opportunities to comment. I believe you can also still comment on Engage Aurora if you have any additional comments or thoughts. So thank you again. Have a wonderful meeting or evening. And with that said, this meeting is adjourned.